My name is Gavin, 34 years old and a successful entrepreneur from Boston. Life was good, my family relationship seemed strong, and I had just invested $320,000 into saving my parents' struggling restaurant chain. Then came that text message from my mom that changed everything. The words on my screen left me speechless. "You weren't invited to dinner. Your brother's girlfriend doesn't like you. How could they exclude their own son after everything I had done?" Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe, and prepare yourself for a story about family betrayal that will leave you shocked. I grew up in a small town outside of Boston as the eldest son of Frank and Martha Williams. My brother Tyler is 5 years younger than me, just 29 now. Our childhood home was modest but comfortable, with my parents working tirelessly to build their dream business, a family restaurant that eventually grew into a small chain of 3 locations across Massachusetts. As the firstborn, I naturally fell into the role of the responsible one. I was always studious, practical, and forward-thinking. By 16, I was already helping with the bookkeeping for the family business while maintaining straight A's. Tyler, on the other hand, was the free spirit. He had a natural charm that drew people to him, but responsibility wasn't his strong suit. My parents never seemed to mind, though. "He's just finding himself," they would say whenever he skipped his shifts or spent money the business could barely afford to lose. I left home at 18 to attend college on a partial scholarship, studying computer science and business. Those years were tough, balancing classes with multiple jobs to cover tuition. My parents could offer little financial help as they poured everything into keeping their restaurants afloat. I understood and never held it against them, but I couldn't help noticing how they always seemed to find money for Tyler's abandoned community college attempts and various business ventures that went nowhere. After graduation, I stayed in Boston and launched my software company. The first few years were challenging, working 16-hour days and living in a tiny apartment where I could barely afford the rent. But eventually, my hard work paid off. My company specialized in restaurant management software, ironically inspired by watching my parents struggle with outdated systems in their business. By 30, I had 20 employees and a growing client base across the East Coast. Despite my busy schedule, I made it a point to visit home for every major holiday and family event. The 4-hour round trip was exhausting after a long work week, but family was family. Tyler, meanwhile, had moved back home after his third failed attempt at college. He worked at our parents' restaurant, but from what I gathered during my visits, his contribution was minimal at best. The dynamic between Tyler and me had always been strained. Growing up, he resented living in my shadow, and I resented the double standards our parents applied to us. As adults, we maintained a polite but distant relationship, exchanging pleasantries during family gatherings but rarely connecting on a deeper level. Everything changed about 7 months ago when Tyler started dating Jessica. I first met her at my mother's 60th birthday celebration. She was striking, with long dark hair and an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Tyler introduced her as a marketing consultant he had met at a business seminar, though I later discovered he had only attended that seminar because our parents had paid for the ticket. From the moment we were introduced, something felt off about Jessica. She smiled at all the right times and said all the right things, but her eyes remained calculating, assessing everything and everyone. When she learned about my software company, her interest visibly increased. "That must be quite profitable," she remarked during dinner. "Tyler tells me you've done very well for yourself." "It's been a lot of hard work," I replied, uncomfortable with her direct reference to my finances. "I'm sure," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But then, some people just have advantages others don't. Throughout the evening, Jessica made several more comments that seemed designed to undermine my accomplishments or suggest I had somehow had an easier path than Tyler. My parents either didn't notice or chose to ignore these subtle jabs, clearly enamored with the woman who had captured their younger son's heart. By the end of the night, I was exhausted from navigating Jessica's passive-aggressive comments. When I hugged my mother goodbye, she whispered, "Isn't she wonderful? Tyler's finally found someone special." I nodded and forced a smile, unwilling to dampen my mother's happiness on her birthday. But driving home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about Jessica or her sudden interest in our family. Over the next few months, I noticed a shift in my interactions with my parents. Our weekly phone calls became shorter, with them seemingly always in a rush to get off the line. When I did visit, Jessica was invariably there, dominating the conversation with stories about her and Tyler's plans for the future. My parents hung on her every word, nodding enthusiastically at her vague descriptions of business opportunities and connections. Despite the growing discomfort, I continued making efforts to maintain a good relationship with my family. I sent thoughtful gifts for birthdays and anniversaries, called regularly, and never missed an important event. I convinced myself that my unease about Jessica was just protectiveness, or perhaps even jealousy, that Tyler had found someone who seemed to bring him focus and ambition, traits I had always wished he would develop. What I didn't realize then was that my efforts to stay connected were about to be tested in ways I never imagined, and that the strained family dynamics of our childhood were nothing compared to what lay ahead. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, just as I was wrapping up a meeting with my development team. I almost let it go to voicemail, but seeing my father's name flash across the screen, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Dad, hey, how are you?" I answered, immediately concerned by the unusual timing. My father rarely called during business hours. "Gavin," he said, his voice tight with stress. "We need to talk. Your mother and I. We're in trouble." Over the next 20 minutes, my father laid out the dire situation facing the family business. A combination of rising food costs, increased competition, and a lengthy road construction project that had cut off easy access to their flagship location had created the perfect storm. They were 3 months behind on their commercial loans and facing foreclosure on all 3 restaurant properties. "We've tried everything," my father said, his voice breaking. "Refinancing, cutting staff, even putting our house up as collateral. Nothing's working. The bank is giving us 30 days. My heart sank. Despite our complicated history, I couldn't bear the thought of my parents losing the business they had built over 30 years. Beyond that, the restaurants employed over 40 people, many of whom had been with our family for decades. "What about Tyler?" I asked. "Is he helping?" There was a pause on the line. "He's doing what he can," my father replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But Jessica thinks they should focus on their future plans rather than, as she puts it, going down with a sinking ship." I bit back my frustration. "How much do you need to keep things afloat?" When my father mentioned the figure $320,000, I nearly dropped my phone. It was a substantial sum, even given my company's success. It represented most of my liquid savings, money I had been setting aside for a potential expansion into the West Coast market. Yet somehow I heard myself saying, "I'll help. But I need to be involved in the business decisions moving forward. This can't just be a handout." The relief in my father's voice was palpable. "Of course, son. Whatever you need. We can't thank you enough." That weekend, I drove to my parents' home with a detailed plan. I had spent the intervening days consulting with my company's financial advisors and researching restaurant revitalization strategies. I arrived with spreadsheets, market analyses, and a comprehensive proposal for how to turn things around. My parents sat at their kitchen table, looking smaller and older than I remembered. The weight of potential failure had clearly taken its toll. As I walked them through my proposal, their expressions shifted from desperation to cautious hope. The plan was straightforward, but would require significant changes. We would temporarily close the worst-performing location to focus resources on the two viable restaurants. I would update their antiquated inventory and booking systems with my company's software at no cost. We would revamp the menu to focus on higher-margin items while keeping the family favorites that had built their loyal customer base. Most importantly, we would invest in targeted local marketing to bring in new customers once the road construction was completed. This is all contingent on my active involvement, I explained. I'll transfer the money, but I need to be part of the decision-making process. Weekly meetings, open books, and veto power on major expenses. This is a business investment, not just family helping family. My parents agreed readily, clearly relieved to have someone take charge of the situation. My mother wiped away tears as she signed the agreement I had drawn up. "We should tell Tyler," my father said once the paperwork was done. Tyler and Jessica arrived an hour later. While my brother seemed genuinely relieved by my intervention, Jessica's reaction was more measured, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned the agreement. "This is very generous," she said carefully. "But won't it be difficult for you to be so involved from Boston? Perhaps Tyler and I could handle the day-to-day implementation of your suggestions." "I'll be coming down every weekend," I replied firmly. "And I'll be installing remote access to all the systems so I can monitor things during the week." Jessica nodded, though I could see she wasn't pleased. Tyler, meanwhile, seemed perfectly happy to have the responsibility shifted to my shoulders. "This is great," he said, clapping me on the back. "I knew you'd come through for the family." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the rescue operation. I took unpaid leave from my own company on Fridays to give myself 3-day weekends at the restaurants. I hired a consultant chef to revamp the menu, personally trained the staff on the new software systems, and worked with a local marketing firm to create a relaunch campaign for when the road construction ended. My parents worked alongside me, energized by the new direction. For the first time in years, I felt truly connected to them. We were partners, working toward a common goal. The family business became a bridge between us, healing old wounds as we collaborated to save what they had built. Tyler's involvement was sporadic at best. He would appear for a few hours, make a show of helping, then disappear with vague excuses about networking opportunities with Jessica. I bit my tongue, focusing instead on the positive changes taking place. By the 2-month mark, we were seeing real progress. The streamlined operations had cut costs by nearly 30%, and the updated menu was proving popular with both long-time customers and new faces. When the road construction finally ended, we held a grand reopening event that brought in record sales for both locations. Standing in the bustling main restaurant on that Saturday night, watching my parents greeting customers with renewed confidence, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was what family was supposed to be about: supporting each other, building something meaningful together. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly valued by my parents. Not just as their successful son who lived far away, but as a partner and contributor to the family legacy. "We couldn't have done this without you," my mother said, hugging me tightly as we counted the night's record-breaking receipts. "You've saved everything we've worked for." That's what family does, I replied, believing in that moment that we had turned a corner in our relationship. The investment wasn't just about money, it was about rebuilding trust and connection. Little did I know that the sense of family unity I was enjoying was built on a foundation far more fragile than I realized, and that the true test of our relationship was yet to come. As summer approached and the restaurants continued their upward trajectory, I noticed subtle shifts in the dynamic. Tyler began showing up more regularly for our weekend strategy sessions, though his contributions remained minimal. More concerning was Jessica's increasing presence. She had started positioning herself as an unofficial marketing consultant, despite having no experience in the restaurant industry. I was thinking we should completely rebrand, she announced during one of our Friday meetings. Something more upscale, more exclusive. The current aesthetic is so dated. I glanced around the warm, inviting dining room with its comfortable booths and family photos lining the walls. The restaurant's homey atmosphere was a key part of its appeal and identity. Our customer surveys show people love the current atmosphere, I countered. Rebranding would alienate our loyal base and cost thousands we don't need to spend. Jessica's smile tightened. Sometimes you need to take risks to reach the next level. Not everyone understands forward thinking. What bothered me wasn't just her suggestion, but the way my parents nodded along, seemingly captivated by her vision, despite its contradiction to everything that had made their business successful for 3 decades. After the meeting, I pulled my father aside. Dad, we agreed on data-driven decisions. The numbers don't support a rebrand. He patted my shoulder dismissively. It's just ideas, Gavin. Jessica has some excellent connections in the Boston restaurant scene. We should at least hear her out. That evening, I discovered my access to the restaurant's social media accounts had been changed without my knowledge. When I questioned my mother about it, she seemed uncomfortable. Jessica offered to handle our social media presence. She says she has experience with influencer marketing. We have a professional handling that as part of our marketing package, I reminded her. That's included in the budget we all agreed to. Well, Jessica is doing it for free, my mother replied. And Tyler thinks her ideas are exciting. This was the first of many small incidents. Over the next few weeks, decisions were increasingly made without my input. A new supplier was chosen despite higher prices. Staff schedules were reorganized without consulting the managers I had helped train. The special events I had planned for July were suddenly under review. Each time I raised concerns, I was met with the same response. Jessica thinks, or Tyler and Jessica suggested. My parents, who had been so grateful for my intervention just months ago, now seemed to view my data-driven approach as stodgy and uninspired compared to Jessica's flashy proposals. The situation came to a head during a vendor meeting I had arranged with a local farm collective to source fresh produce at competitive prices. I arrived to find the meeting already in progress, with Jessica sitting in my usual seat beside my father. Gavin, there you are, my mother said brightly. Jessica was just explaining her vision for a premium ingredient sourcing strategy. I stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the scene. The farmers looked confused by the sudden change in direction, shuffling through the contract proposals I had prepared with them weeks earlier. We had already agreed on terms, I said carefully. Jessica smiled up at me. We're just exploring options. These gentlemen understand that businesses need to consider all possibilities, don't you? By the end of the meeting, the carefully negotiated deal was in shambles, and the farmers left looking disgruntled. As soon as they were gone, I confronted my parents. What was that? We spent weeks working out those terms. They were giving us priority access to their best produce at below market rates. My father shrugged. Jessica thinks we can do better with some of her contacts in the organic food industry. Her contacts, I echoed incredulously. Has she produced any actual proposals? Cost comparisons? Delivery guarantees? Not everyone operates with spreadsheets, Gavin, Tyler interjected, having appeared from the back office. Some people understand the value of relationship-based business. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. The agreement was that major decisions would be made collectively, with full transparency. That was the condition of my investment. Oh, don't be so rigid, Jessica said with a laugh that set my teeth on edge. Family businesses are fluid. Isn't that right, Frank? She touched my father's arm with familiar ease. That evening, I discovered another troubling development. The business checking account I had set up, which required dual authorization for withdrawals over $1,000, had been modified. A new account had been created that gave Tyler and my father independent signing authority. When I called my father about it, he sounded defensive. We need operational flexibility, Gavin. Sometimes decisions need to be made quickly, and you're not always available. That's why we have the emergency protocols we established, I reminded him. And I'm always available by phone. It's not just about availability, he replied after a pause. Sometimes your approach is too conservative. The restaurant business requires instinct, not just numbers. My conservative approach saved the business, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. There was a long silence before my father responded. We appreciate everything you've done, Gavin. No one's saying otherwise. But now that we're stable again, maybe it's time to try some new directions. After hanging up, I sat in my Boston apartment staring at my laptop screen, where I could see the restaurant's financial dashboard. The numbers told a clear story. The business was indeed stable now, showing consistent profits for the first time in years. My strategy had worked. And now that it had, I was being edged out. The following weekend, I arrived unannounced at the main restaurant location to find Jessica leading a meeting with the staff. Tyler sat beside her, while my parents stood in the background. The whiteboard behind them outlined a complete reorganization of the restaurant's management structure, with Tyler listed as Operations Director and Jessica as Marketing and Strategy Consultant. My name was nowhere to be seen. When they noticed me in the doorway, there was an awkward silence. My mother recovered first, hurrying over with a too bright smile. Gavin, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. We were just discussing some exciting new ideas. I can see that, I replied, scanning the whiteboard again. Interesting that these exciting ideas are being implemented without any discussion with the person who provided the capital to keep this business running. Tyler stood up, his expression defensive. We were going to fill you in tomorrow. This is just preliminary brainstorming. With the entire staff present, I gestured to the uncomfortable-looking employees. This doesn't look preliminary to me. As the staff filed out, leaving just family and Jessica, I confronted them directly. 3 months ago, you were on the verge of bankruptcy. I invested my personal savings based on specific agreements about how decisions would be made. Now I'm finding out about new accounts, reorganizations, and strategy shifts after they've already been implemented. My father looked uncomfortable but stood his ground. The business is changing, evolving. Jessica has brought some excellent ideas that are already showing promise. What ideas? What promise? I asked. Show me the data. Jessica stepped forward. Not everything can be reduced to spreadsheets, Gavin. Sometimes you need to trust the vision of people who understand modern restaurant trends. I looked at her directly. And what exactly is your experience in the restaurant industry, Jessica? Because I've looked into your background, and I can't seem to find any. A flash of something cold crossed her face before she composed herself. My experience is in recognizing opportunities and connecting people. Something that can't be learned from textbooks or software algorithms. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Tyler accusing me of being controlling and Jessica suggesting I was threatened by fresh perspectives. My parents remained largely silent, occasionally making placating comments but never actually addressing the breach of our agreement. I left that night with a growing sense of dread. Something fundamental had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica was orchestrating it all, with Tyler as her willing accomplice and my parents as unwitting pawns. Driving back to Boston, I made a decision. I would give them one more chance to honor our original agreement. If they continued on this path, I would need to protect my investment and myself from whatever game Jessica was playing. I had no idea then just how ugly things were about to get, or that a simple text message would soon reveal exactly where I stood in my family's priorities. The financial reports for July came in better than expected. Despite my concerns about the changes being made, the restaurants were thriving. The combination of my systematic improvements and the renewed energy my parents were showing had created a perfect storm of success. Each location was showing at least 20% growth compared to the previous year, and staff morale was at an all-time high. My father called with the news, sounding more excited than I had heard him in years. "We're planning a celebration dinner this Saturday," he announced. "A private event after closing, just family and senior staff. We want to thank everyone who helped turn things around." Despite my lingering concerns about Jessica's influence, I felt a surge of pride and anticipation. This was what I had hoped for when I made the investment, not just financial recovery, but a renewed sense of purpose and community around the business my parents had built. "I'll be there," I promised. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," my father replied warmly. "Your mother's handling everything." For the next few days, I found myself looking forward to the celebration with genuine enthusiasm. Perhaps I had been too suspicious of Jessica's involvement. Maybe her ideas, combined with my systems, were creating a synergy that benefited everyone. I even bought a bottle of champagne from a boutique vineyard in California, one of my clients owned, planning to make a toast to new beginnings and family collaboration. Saturday morning, I was packing my overnight bag when my phone chimed with a text message from my mother. Expecting last-minute details about the dinner, I opened it casually. What I read stopped me cold. "Gavin, your father, and I think it might be better if you didn't come tonight. Jessica has mentioned she feels uncomfortable around you, and we don't want to put Tyler in an awkward position. We can celebrate with you another time." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. My parents were uninviting me, their own son, from a celebration of a business I had saved with my own money because their younger son's girlfriend felt uncomfortable around me. The disbelief quickly gave way to a hollow feeling in my chest. I tried calling my mother immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. Same with my father's phone. I sent a text asking for an explanation, but received no response. 20 minutes later, as I sat stunned on the edge of my bed, another message came through, this one from Tyler. "Mom told me about the dinner. Think it's for the best if you give us some family space right now. Jessica says she feels threatened by your constant questioning of her ideas. Maybe take some time to reflect on how you come across to others." Family space. As if I wasn't family. As if I was some outsider intruding on their circle, rather than their son and brother, who had put his own financial future on the line to save their business. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but now it was accompanied by a cold clarity. I needed to understand exactly what was happening with the business I had invested in. I opened my laptop and logged into the restaurant management system I had installed. At first glance, everything looked in order. The sales figures matched what my father had reported. Inventory was being managed efficiently, and staffing levels were appropriate for the volume. But when I dug deeper into the financial modules, I discovered something disturbing. A series of consulting fees had been added to the monthly expenses, totaling over $15,000. The recipient was listed as JT Strategic Consulting, a company I had never heard of and certainly hadn't approved. A quick online search revealed that JT Strategic Consulting had been registered as an LLC just 1 month earlier. The business address was Tyler's apartment. My stomach dropped as the pieces fell into place. Jessica and Tyler had created a shell company and were siphoning money from the restaurant directly into their own pockets, disguised as legitimate consulting fees. Further investigation revealed more troubling changes. The ownership structure of the restaurants had been modified. While my parents still held 51%, Tyler now showed as owning 29%, a share he had never paid for or earned. My own investment was documented, but classified as a loan rather than the equity stake we had agreed upon. Most concerning of all, I discovered an email thread accidentally left accessible through the shared document system. In it, Jessica and Tyler discussed plans to phase out Gavin's involvement completely once they had secured operational control. Jessica wrote about convincing my parents that my interference was holding the business back from reaching its true potential. There was even discussion of how to legally minimize Gavin's claim on the business, with Jessica suggesting they could argue my investment was a family gift rather than a business transaction if they could get my parents to support that narrative. The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope and calculation. Not only were Jessica and Tyler actively working to push me out, but they were manipulating my parents into believing it was the right thing to do for the business and the family. I printed everything I found and placed it in a folder. Then I sent a single-word reply to my mother's text. Okay. No arguments, no questions, no emotional pleas. Just acknowledgement. I knew now what I was dealing with, and emotional reactions would only play into their hands. Instead, I made a series of phone calls to my attorney, my financial advisor, and finally, a private investigator I had used for corporate background checks in the past. I gave him Jessica's name and what little information I had about her, asking for a complete background check as quickly as possible. That evening, as my family gathered without me to celebrate the success my money and expertise had created, I sat in my Boston apartment methodically documenting every aspect of my investment and involvement in the restaurant business. Every email, every transfer, every agreement, both written and verbal. I was no longer fighting just to maintain my relationship with my family. I was fighting to protect myself from what was clearly a calculated attempt to defraud me. And as the son who had always played by the rules, always done the right thing, I was about to show them that my reasonable nature had been mistaken for weakness. The text excluding me from the family dinner wasn't just a personal slight. It was the final confirmation that Jessica had successfully driven a wedge between me and my family. But in doing so, she had made a critical error. She had freed me from the emotional entanglements that might have kept me from seeing the situation objectively. Now I could see everything clearly, and I was prepared to act. I slept surprisingly well that night, the kind of deep sleep that comes after a profound realization. When I woke the next morning, my path forward was crystal clear in my mind. This wasn't about family dynamics anymore. This was about protecting myself from fraud. My first call was to my attorney, James Patterson, who had helped structure the initial investment in my parents' business. I forwarded him all the documentation I had gathered and explained the situation. They violated multiple clauses in the investment agreement, he confirmed after reviewing the materials. The unauthorized change in business structure alone gives you grounds to withdraw remaining funding and potentially reclaim what you've already invested. What's my best move here? I asked. Given the personal relationships involved, I'd recommend a measured approach, James advised. Start by freezing any remaining funds and formally documenting the breaches of agreement. That gives you leverage for negotiation before things escalate to litigation. I spent Sunday morning reviewing the original investment contract with James, identifying every violation. The agreement had been structured with quarterly payments rather than a lump sum precisely to protect me in a scenario like this, though I never actually expected to need those protections. By noon, I had a clear understanding of my options. The contract included a clause allowing me to suspend future payments if specific conditions weren't met, including the requirement that any changes to business structure or management required my written approval. With James' guidance, I drafted a formal notice of contract violation that would be delivered to my parents the following day. But before sending it, I needed to address the immediate financial situation. I logged into my bank account and canceled all scheduled transfers to the restaurant business. Then I contacted the bank that held the business accounts where my investment funds were deposited. As a named partner on those accounts, I had the authority to place a temporary freeze on large transactions pending resolution of a partnership dispute. The bank representative was professional and efficient, assuring me that any transaction over $5,000 would require additional verification for the next 7 days. Next came the most personally difficult step. I logged into the restaurant management system one last time and systematically downloaded all financial records, then deleted my own access credentials. As I did so, I discovered the folder containing the 101 digital receipts I had meticulously created to track every aspect of my investment: the equipment purchases, the marketing expenses, the staff training costs, all carefully categorized and annotated. After downloading copies for my records, I deleted them from the system. Without those receipts, the accounting for the past quarter would be a nightmare to reconstruct. It wasn't technically destructive; my copies could be restored if needed, but it would create immediate confusion and administrative chaos. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone at the restaurant discovered what I had done. Sure enough, my phone began ringing at 2:17 p.m. My father's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother called. Then Tyler. Then the restaurant's main line. One after another the calls came in, none of which I answered. Instead, I listened to the voicemails as they accumulated, tracking the progression from confusion to alarm to anger. Gavin, it's Dad. There seems to be some problem with the account. Call me back as soon as you get this. Gavin, it's Mom. Please call us, it's urgent. The bank is saying something about a freeze on the accounts. What the hell, Gavin? The whole system is locked up, and all the receipt files are missing. Call me back now. Tyler's voice was tight with panic. I texted my father a simple message. I'm aware of the financial irregularities and unauthorized changes to the business structure. My attorney will be in contact tomorrow to discuss next steps. Within minutes, my phone exploded with calls again, which I continued to ignore. Instead, I focused on the next phase of my plan. The private investigator I had hired called with preliminary findings about Jessica that exceeded even my suspicions. She had been involved in at least 2 previous situations with small businesses where she had positioned herself as a consultant, gained influence with the owners, and eventually left under questionable financial circumstances. While she had never been formally charged, there were civil complaints that had been settled privately. More disturbing was the discovery that Jessica's real name wasn't even Jessica Taylor, as she had presented herself. She was Jessica Tierney, and she had a history of changing her identity slightly when moving to new areas. Armed with this information, I called a forensic accountant who specialized in small business fraud and arranged for him to be on standby. If negotiations didn't go well, I wanted to be prepared for a full investigation. By Sunday evening, I had received 17 missed calls and 9 increasingly desperate text messages. The final one from my mother hit hardest. "Gavin, please. We're your family. Whatever this is about, we can work it out together." I nearly weakened at that, my finger hovering over the call button. Then I remembered the text uninviting me from the dinner, the casual dismissal of my concerns, and the email thread discussing how to minimize my claim on the business. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated effort to push me out after taking my money. Monday morning, I received a call from James. "They've retained counsel," he informed me. "A Michael Brennan from Coastal Business Law. He's requesting an immediate meeting to resolve misunderstandings." "What's your read?" I asked. "They're scared," James replied. "Brennan's solid but not a heavy hitter. I think they want to contain this quickly, which gives us leverage." We agreed to a meeting on Wednesday at James' office, neutral ground that gave us the home field advantage. I spent Tuesday reviewing the additional information my private investigator had uncovered about Jessica's past and preparing a comprehensive presentation of the evidence of financial impropriety. Wednesday morning, I dressed in my best suit and drove to James' office, arriving early to review our strategy one final time. At exactly 10 o'clock, the receptionist announced the arrival of my parents, Tyler, Jessica, and their attorney. As they filed into the conference room, I observed each of them carefully. My parents looked tired and confused, with the slightly shell-shocked expression of people whose world had suddenly tilted sideways. Tyler alternated between nervous and defiant, his posture stiff and unnatural. Jessica, however, was the picture of composed confidence, dressed immaculately in a conservative business suit that screamed respectability. "Thank you all for coming," James began smoothly. "We're here to discuss some serious concerns regarding the investment agreement between Gavin and Williams Family Restaurants." Michael Brennan, a gray-haired man with an authoritative presence, nodded. "My clients are eager to resolve any misunderstandings. They value their relationship with Gavin and want to ensure all parties are satisfied with the business arrangement." "This goes beyond misunderstandings," I said, speaking for the first time. "This is about systematic violation of our agreement and potentially fraudulent activity." The word fraudulent landed like a bomb in the room. My mother gasped audibly, while my father's face flushed red. Tyler started to speak, but Jessica placed a warning hand on his arm. Over the next hour, James methodically presented our evidence. The unauthorized changes to the business structure, the consulting fees paid to JT Strategic Consulting, the reclassification of my investment as a loan rather than equity, and the email discussions about pushing me out of the business. With each piece of evidence, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier. My parents' expressions shifted from confusion to horror as they began to understand the full scope of what had been happening. Tyler became increasingly agitated, while Jessica's composed facade began to show cracks. When James finished the presentation of financial evidence, I took over. "There's one more aspect we need to address," I said, opening a folder the private investigator had prepared. "The matter of Jessica Tierney's background and history with small businesses." Jessica's head snapped up at the use of her real surname. "That's not relevant to this discussion," she interjected sharply. "I believe it is," I continued calmly, "considering your history with the Bradshaw family restaurant in Connecticut in 2019 and the Miller Craft Brewery in Rhode Island in 2021. Both businesses experienced similar patterns of consulting fees, restructuring, and financial irregularities during your involvement." I slid copies of the investigator's report across the table. My parents looked down at the documents in disbelief, then at Jessica, whose composure had completely evaporated. "This is slander," she hissed. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can," James interjected smoothly. "We have sworn statements from both families, financial records, and documentation of the settlements you reached with them to avoid court proceedings." The room fell silent. Tyler stared at Jessica as if seeing her for the first time. My parents looked devastated, the full reality of their situation finally sinking in. Michael Brennan, to his credit, maintained his professionalism despite the bombshell revelations. "Perhaps we should take a short recess to allow my clients to confer," he suggested. During the break, I remained in the conference room while the others stepped out. Through the glass walls, I could see my parents and Tyler engaged in an intense conversation with Jessica, their body language speaking volumes. My father was gesturing emphatically, my mother was wiping tears, and Tyler looked torn between defending Jessica and confronting her. When they returned 15 minutes later, the dynamic had shifted palpably. Jessica sat slightly apart from Tyler, her expression cold. My parents avoided looking at her entirely, their focus now entirely on me and James. "My clients would like to propose a resolution," Brennan began, his tone considerably more subdued. "They acknowledge the concerns raised and are prepared to restore the original terms of the investment agreement, with additional oversight protections to ensure compliance moving forward." James looked to me, and I nodded slightly. "We're open to discussion," he replied. "However, given what we've uncovered, we would require several non-negotiable conditions." I took over, addressing my parents directly. "First, all consulting agreements with JT Strategic Consulting, or any entity connected to Jessica, must be terminated immediately. Second, the ownership structure must be restored to what we originally agreed upon, with proper documentation of my equity stake. Third, Jessica must have no involvement whatsoever in the business operations, management, or finances." My father nodded slowly, looking older than I had ever seen him. "And if we agree to these terms, then I'm willing to unfreeze the accounts and continue supporting the business," I replied. This was never about punishing the business or its employees. It was about stopping what was clearly a systematic attempt to defraud me and potentially the business itself. Jessica stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing but try to help modernize an outdated family business. Tyler, are you really going to let him dictate who you can work with?" Tyler looked conflicted, glancing between Jessica and our parents. "Just the evidence. It's pretty clear something wasn't right here." "So you're choosing them over me?" she demanded. The conference room fell silent as everyone awaited Tyler's response. After what seemed like an eternity, he squared his shoulders. "I think you should leave, Jessica," he said quietly. "We need to work this out as a family." The look she gave him could have frozen fire. Without another word, Jessica gathered her belongings and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind her. In the silence that followed, my mother reached across the table toward me, her hand trembling slightly. "Gavin, we had no idea. You have to believe that." I didn't take her hand. The wound was still too fresh. "We have a lot to discuss," I said instead. "And a lot to rebuild, not just the business, but trust." My father nodded gravely. "We understand. And we're prepared to do whatever it takes to make this right." As the meeting concluded and formal agreements were drawn up to restore the proper business structure, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a hollow sadness that it had come to this. But beneath that sadness was a quiet certainty that I had done what was necessary to protect myself, and ultimately, my family, from someone who would have destroyed them financially, just as she had attempted to destroy our relationship. The road to rebuilding trust would be long, but at least now there was a path forward. The weeks following the conference room showdown were tense but productive. James worked with Brennan to draft new agreements that not only restored the original terms of my investment, but added additional protections. My parents signed without hesitation, clearly shell-shocked by how thoroughly they had been manipulated. Tyler's situation was more complicated. While he had ultimately sided with the family against Jessica, his role in the deception remained unclear. Had he been an active participant, or just another one of Jessica's victims? The truth, as is often the case, lay somewhere in between. I didn't know about her past, Tyler insisted during a private meeting at my apartment in Boston. But I knew about the consulting company and the fees. She convinced me it was standard practice, that we deserved compensation for our ideas. Ideas that were built on the foundation I created with my investment, I pointed out. Tyler had the decency to look ashamed. "I know. It was wrong. I got caught up in finally feeling like I was good at something, like I was contributing. Jessica made me feel important." I studied my brother's face, seeing both the manipulative man who had tried to push me out and the insecure boy who had always lived in my shadow. "The question is, what happens now? Do you want to be part of the business legitimately, with real responsibility and accountability? Or was this just about the money?" "I want to learn," Tyler said after a long pause. "Really learn, not just pretend. I've always been jealous of how easily everything seemed to come to you. But watching you turn the restaurants around showed me what real business acumen looks like." His admission surprised me. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had as adults. "It wasn't easy," I told him. "None of it was easy. I just did the work." We agreed that Tyler would remain involved in the business, but in a probationary capacity, with clearly defined responsibilities and direct supervision. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a starting point. My parents were another matter entirely. The betrayal cut deeper with them, particularly the text message excluding me from the celebration dinner. During our first meeting after the confrontation, my mother broke down completely. "We were blind," she sobbed. She was so convincing, always talking about how much she cared about the family business, how her ideas would secure its future for generations. "She made it seem like your oversight was holding us back. And you believed her over your own son," I said quietly. "The son who put his own financial security on the line to save your business." My father, never an emotional man, looked defeated. "We have no excuse, Gavin. We got caught up in her vision, in the excitement of the turnaround. She was here every day, whispering in our ears while you were in Boston. It doesn't justify anything, but that's what happened." I understood the psychology of what had occurred. Jessica had exploited the daily access she had to my parents, gradually reshaping their perception of my involvement while positioning herself and Tyler as the true saviors of the family legacy. It was a calculated campaign that played on my parents' vulnerabilities and the geographic distance that separated us. Understanding it, however, didn't erase the hurt. I need time, I told them honestly. I'm committed to the business because I believe in what we've built, but our personal relationship needs to heal on its own timeline. They accepted this with sad resignation, acknowledging that they had broken something precious that couldn't be instantly repaired. As for Jessica, she didn't go quietly. A week after the confrontation, she launched a small claim suit against Tyler for unpaid consulting work, clearly a retaliatory move designed to cause trouble rather than recover any legitimate fees. When that failed to gain traction, she began spreading rumors in the local restaurant community about mismanagement at my parents' establishments. Her final attempt at revenge came in the form of a scathing online review campaign, with dozens of suspicious one-star reviews appearing overnight on various platforms. Fortunately, our regular customers recognized the fraud for what it was, and the review sites removed the obvious spam after we reported it. Through it all, I maintained a professional approach, focusing on strengthening the business rather than engaging in a personal vendetta. The private investigator continued monitoring Jessica's activities until we were confident she had moved on to her next target, a small tech startup in Providence, whose founder she had reportedly started dating. I considered warning them, but ultimately decided against it. Without concrete evidence of criminal activity, any intervention would likely be dismissed as a personal grudge. Instead, I made a donation to a consumer protection nonprofit that specialized in small business fraud awareness. By the 3-month mark, the restaurants were back on solid footing, with proper management structures and transparent financial reporting. I had established weekly video conferences with the management team and monthly in-person visits, striking a balance between oversight and operational independence. Tyler, somewhat to my surprise, had thrown himself into learning the business properly. He enrolled in night classes on restaurant management and accounting, and his questions during our meetings showed genuine engagement rather than the superficial interest he had previously displayed. "I've never seen him apply himself like this," my father commented during one of my visits. "It's like he's finally found his purpose." "Sometimes we need to hit bottom before we can rebuild," I replied, thinking of how the entire ordeal had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our family dynamic. The most significant change came 6 months after the confrontation. During a quarterly review meeting, my father announced his intention to step back from day-to-day operations. "I'm not getting any younger," he explained. And this situation with Jessica made me realize I'm not as sharp as I used to be. The business needs younger leadership with modern ideas, but tempered with the wisdom to avoid the kind of mistakes we made. He looked directly at me. "We'd like you to take over as CEO, Gavin. Not just as an investor, but as the leader of the company. Tyler has agreed to work under your direction as operations manager for the Boston locations, with the understanding that he needs to earn any further advancement." The offer stunned me. Despite our progress in rebuilding the business relationship, I hadn't expected such a complete handover of control. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "Both of you?" My mother nodded. "We're sure. You saved this business twice, once with your money, and once from our own poor judgment. No one is better qualified to lead it forward." After careful consideration and discussions with my own company's board about how to balance my responsibilities, I accepted the position. We announced the transition at a company-wide meeting, where my father formally handed me the keys to the original restaurant location, a symbolic gesture that moved me more than I had expected. As we shared a toast with the entire staff, I caught Tyler's eye across the room. There was something new in his expression, a mixture of respect and determination that suggested our relationship, too, might eventually heal into something stronger than before. The business that had nearly torn our family apart was now, ironically, becoming the foundation upon which we were rebuilding our relationships. Not with blind trust or unexamined loyalty, but with clear eyes, defined boundaries, and a shared commitment to doing better than we had before. It wasn't the family dynamic I had grown up with, or even the one I had imagined when I first agreed to invest in the business. It was something new, forged in the fire of betrayal and the hard work of reconciliation. And despite everything, I found myself cautiously optimistic about what we were creating together. 1 year after that fateful text message, I stood in the private dining room of our flagship restaurant, surveying the gathered crowd. The space had been transformed for our annual staff appreciation dinner, with soft lighting, elegant table settings, and a slideshow displaying the highlights of our most successful year ever. All 3 restaurant locations were now thriving, with the original concept having evolved into a more refined dining experience, while still maintaining the warmth and personal touch that had been its foundation. We had even opened a 4th location, a fast casual spin-off that catered to a younger demographic while introducing them to our family recipes. My parents sat at a central table, greeting staff members as they arrived. They looked happier and more relaxed than they had in years, enjoying their semi-retirement and occasional hosting duties without the stress of daily operations. My father had taken up golf, while my mother volunteered at a culinary program for disadvantaged youth, finding new purpose outside the business that had defined most of their adult lives. Tyler entered the room carrying a stack of presentation folders, his face serious as he double-checked that everything was in order. In the past year, he had grown tremendously, both professionally and personally. The experience with Jessica had been a harsh but effective wake-up call, forcing him to confront his own insecurities and tendency to seek validation through shortcuts rather than genuine achievement. "Everything set for the announcement?" I asked him as he approached. He nodded, a mixture of nervousness and pride on his face. "All the paperwork's ready. Are you sure about this?" "Completely sure," I replied. "You've earned it." The announcement in question was Tyler's promotion to general manager of our newest location, a position he had genuinely earned through dedication, hard work, and a newly discovered talent for operational efficiency. What had begun as a probationary role had evolved into legitimate expertise, with Tyler putting in long hours and consistently exceeding the performance metrics we had established. As dinner concluded and I rose to address the staff, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain of that initial betrayal had not disappeared entirely, it had merely transformed into something different, a kind of emotional scar tissue that had ultimately made our family relationship stronger, if less blindly trusting. "A year ago," I began, "this business was at a crossroads, not just financially but as a family legacy. Today, we're stronger than ever, not because we avoided difficulties, but because we faced them honestly and did the hard work of rebuilding." I announced Tyler's promotion to enthusiastic applause, watching with genuine pleasure as my brother accepted the keys to the new location, with a maturity that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier. Later that evening, as the event wound down, my mother joined me at the bar where I was enjoying a quiet moment alone. "I still think about it, she said softly. "That text message. I let someone else dictate how I treated my own son. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself completely for that." I studied her face, seeing both the mother who had hurt me deeply and the woman who had worked tirelessly to make amends. "I've learned something important through all this," I told her. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending the hurt never happened. It's about choosing to build something new on the ruins of what was broken. She covered my hand with hers. You've always been the wisest of us, even as a boy. I'm so proud of the man you've become, Gavin. Not just your success, but your character, your ability to stand firm when it matters without becoming hard or bitter. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: the upcoming holiday plans, a new menu item being tested, my father's increasingly elaborate golf outfits. The ease between us wasn't the same as the uncomplicated relationship we'd had before the betrayal, but in many ways, it was more authentic, built on a clearer understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Tyler joined us eventually, nursing a club soda rather than his once customary beer, another change that reflected his commitment to his new responsibilities. "Have you heard anything about Jessica recently?" he asked, the first time he had voluntarily mentioned her name in months. I nodded. "My contact in Providence says she's moved on again. Apparently, the tech startup figured out her game before she could do too much damage. She's in New York now, according to her social media." "I still can't believe I fell for it," Tyler said, shaking his head. "She knew exactly which buttons to push: my insecurity about measuring up to you, my desire to impress mom and dad. It's embarrassing how easily I was manipulated." "Don't be too hard on yourself," I replied. "She was a professional. And in a strange way, we all needed that wake-up call. The family dynamic wasn't healthy before her, we just didn't see it clearly." It was true. My parents' favoritism toward Tyler, my resentment, Tyler's insecurity and resulting need for shortcuts, all of it had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Jessica had merely exploited what was already there, bringing our dysfunctional patterns into sharp relief. The strange thing is, my mother reflected, in trying to tear this family apart, she ultimately forced us to build something stronger. "Not that I'd thank her for it," she added with a wry smile. As I drove back to my apartment that night, I thought about the profound lesson I had learned through the entire ordeal. Family love, I had discovered, was not an entitlement but a relationship that required boundaries, respect, and sometimes painful honesty. The unconditional aspect wasn't about accepting mistreatment, but about being willing to do the difficult work of rebuilding when things fell apart. I had also learned something essential about myself: that standing up for my own worth wasn't selfish or unloving, but necessary for any healthy relationship. By canceling those payments and deleting those receipts, I hadn't just protected my financial investment, I had declared that I deserved better treatment from the people who claimed to love me. The text message that had once broken my heart now stood as a turning point in my life. The moment I had finally established the boundaries I should have set long ago. And while I wouldn't wish such painful lessons on anyone, I couldn't deny that they had ultimately led to a more authentic life and stronger, healthier relationships. As I pulled into my parking space, my phone chimed with a message from Tyler. "Thanks for believing in me when I gave you every reason not to. Working to make sure you never regret it." I smiled as I typed my reply. Family is about second chances. Just make them count. And that, perhaps, was the deepest truth I had discovered. Family relationships weren't defined by blind loyalty or endless forgiveness, but by the willingness to offer second chances when they were genuinely earned, and the courage to make those chances count. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who took you for granted? What did you do when your kindness was mistaken for weakness? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the most painful lessons lead to the most profound growth. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to stand up for your worth in all your relationships.